I was trying to explain to Khalid earlier how the situation in the Middle East could be solved through theology. I don't think I explained it particularly well. He didn't accept that the Hamas-Israel war or the Israel-Iran war are, in fact, wars of the Abrahamic religions. I also know that the chief rabbi of Iran doesn't want to frame it in those terms, presumably because Iran is also an empire and has a multitude of religious groups within it and doesn't want to cause upset amongst the different religious communities of Iran. But I think if we can be honest and reasonable about it, we can solve it. In theory. So, if we accept that the conflict in the Middle East is really a battle of the Abrahamic religions, we need to decide a victor. And the dynamics of three participants is interesting because really all it takes is one of the participants to take the side of another, and then you'll have a clear winner. So, in military terms, obviously the Christian imperialists have the upper hand in military supremacy as well as control of global media. However, if you want to look at it through the eyes of God, so to speak, then, as I understand it, he would have to decide according to who is most righteous. How can you tell if a person is righteous? Well, it's really a two-stage process. So you have to determine which is the most righteous religion. But just because somebody claims to be, whatever religion he claims to be, doesn't mean that he is in fact righteous. He could be a liar, or he could be a member of a particular religion, but breaking all the rules. So it's a two-stage process. I put it to you. So you might find someone saying he's Jewish, but then on further inquiry, you might find he's a secular Jew and therefore does not keep the Sabbath, and therefore, according to the book of Deuteronomy, attracts a penalty of death by stoning. So you obviously you can't take the word of this Jew seriously because he would be considered heretical by those Jews who do practice it. Same with people calling themselves Christian. They may call themselves Christian without having even undergone a confirmation ceremony. So they would only be cultural Christians because the only reason why they identify as Christian is because they only had knowledge of going to church rather than mosque or synagogue or temple. So they are really only cultural Christians, as I am, because I probably have been to more churches than I have been to mosques or synagogues. So I would say that the only people entitled to claim Christian identity are people who have undergone a confirmation ceremony. But this, and the confirmation ceremony is something done under the Catholic and Anglican churches. The Orthodox Church do not have a confirmation ceremony, interestingly enough. They only have the process of what is called chrismation, which is an all-in-one ceremony. So after having been born, uh, and your Orthodox priest dunks you in the baptismal font, you undergo a process called chrismation when you're an infant, and you obviously had no opinion about the Trinity or anything like that. So it's not really a fair way of claiming you. I suppose as a Jew, you could say you never agreed to be circumcised if you were a boy. But there are many things that are done to us without our knowledge or consent at the time. So for Orthodox Christians, there is no confirmation ceremony to undergo. They become Orthodox Christian on being chrismated. I think Catholics and Anglicans have got themselves a bit more rights than the Orthodox Christian, because presumably the confirmation ceremony came up because people objected to being considered Christian without their consent as a child. But I assume they didn't quite dare in Russia because of the terrible consequences of people challenging the Trinity. I imagine there would be, well, I think they must have burnt heretics too. And according to church history, the Orthodox Church, Orthodox Christians claim to have a tradition as old as Catholicism, because they say they have kept to the old rites more than the Christians calling themselves Catholic in Western Europe. So there is something suspect about Christianity because of all these different ways of calling oneself Christian. Obviously, it's not fair to be called a Christian when you had nothing to say about the matter. But anyway, I am saying that if Christianity is idolatry, then obviously it's inferior to Islam, which isn't idolatry. And therefore, if Jews decided in favor of Islam, as they must do, because they've already said that Jews are not allowed to enter churches, which are places of abomination where idolatry is practiced, but allowed to pray with Muslims in mosques. So according to their own traditions and their own established practices, Jews should be okay with Christians. Sorry, should be okay with Islam, which honest Orthodox rabbis would declare to be no hide compared to Christians who worship idolatrously an executed blasphemer. So if rabbis were prepared to make a statement declaring Christianity to be less no hide than Islam, a lot of the position, the theoretical, theological position would be made clearer, and as a consequence, the terrible violence in the Middle East be ended sooner rather than later. thing is that there are all these unprincipled rabbis who know on which side their bread is buttered. They are also Islamophobes, and I suppose they would rather die than declare Christianity to be idolatry and Islam to be no-hide, even if it were obvious to any objective bystander that this is what they ought to do. So Muslims could seek out rabbis and ask them to rank the four Gentile religions, but they don't do that because they can't take, well, I guess they don't take Judaism seriously. They also hate Jews and they don't want to be seen to be asking Jews to do anything for them. And this is really the problem. And possibly, Muslims don't even take their own religious principles seriously, so why would you expect them to take the religious principles of Jews seriously? So this is what I imagine. Christians and Muslims going before Orthodox rabbis and asking them whether Christianity or Islam is more no-hide. And I think any honest and reasonable ultra-Orthodox rabbi would have to come down on the side of Islam. And then things would become a little clearer in that Israel should be under Sharia to enjoy peace with its neighbors. But you see, that's not the purpose of the Western imperialists. I think the Americans want Jews to keep fighting Arabs so they can keep selling arms to Israel, or so that the defense industries, let's not call them defense industries, let's call them arms manufacturers, can get the US government to keep buying their weaponry, payable by the American taxpayer, of course, to keep the war going. I don't think they want peace in the Middle East because then nobody would want to buy their weapons anymore. So it's this endless cycle of violence that is being kept going by the arms manufacturers and the unprincipled Jews who refuse to come down on the side of Islam and therefore keep Christian Zionism going to fuel the endless violence. So we can understand that the Muslim morons don't know, they don't understand what I'm trying to say, or they're deliberately closing their eyes and shutting up their ears because they I guess they don't want to be proven wrong by me, to be told that their suffering has been a consequence of their refusal to understand their own scripture correctly. So if they did finally decide to obey chapter 18, verse 4 of the Quran, which commands them to admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son, they could do it. They could actually do it jointly with Jews, but because of their hatred of Jews, they can't even bring themselves to think of such a thing. And you will notice in my stream with Khalid that he refused to take the no-hide law seriously because he thinks it's a very niche interest. But if you did take it seriously, then it would become clear that only righteous Jews and Gentiles take idolatry seriously. Those who are not righteous just can't take the whole the Noahide law seriously. But if they did and got together with the Jews, then they would make a big splash and draw global attention to them. Because I think fundamentally everybody's interested, right? And that there are 5 world religions, and the 4 Gentile religions would be kind of interested to know how their particular religion ranks. And Jews, and in particular rabbis, could grant them this pleasure and knowledge by ranking the 4 Gentile religions according to their conformity with the Noahide laws. They could do that, but I guess they're too cowardly. They don't want to offend anyone, and they certainly don't want to offend their Christian overlords, who's paying for the whole thing, right? Who's paying for Israel. So because of these petty political interests and their lack of proper principle, all these 3 religions are in fact, by their refusal to act and speak, allowing the violence to continue. So these Muslims and Christians and Jews can wring their hands and pretend to be concerned, but they can easily do end it by asking each other which of the 4 Gentile religions is most Noahide. And if the answer is obvious, why can't our rabbis say so? And when our rabbis say Islam is most Noahide and Christianity least Noahide, people will begin to talk about what they must do, particularly people in the West who haven't got a proper religion, whose civilization is declining. That would help them enormously. But I guess I'm growing a little weary of trying to explain simple facts to them, because they actually don't want to know, they don't want to listen, they don't want to admit that they've been wrong for over a millennia. And they don't want somebody like me telling them what's what and who's who. And so basically they're saying they would rather die and go to hell more than once, just to avoid admitting that I'm right and they're wrong, and that this business of war in the Middle East could be very easily solved by just a few rabbis saying, we have an announcement to make. There are 2 rabbis I have in mind, Rabbi Yosef Mizrahi and Rabbi Yaron Reuven, and they just have to say that Islam is Noahide and Christianity is the least Noahide of all the 4 Gentile religions. They could go on to say that maybe it would be better for Jews living in Israel to live under the Noahide laws. And if Israel itself does not currently comply with the 7 Noahide laws, they could be made to comply with the 7 Noahide laws. But then, you see, the problem with the 7 Noahide laws is that the first and second Noahide laws mirror exactly the first and second commandments, forbidding idolatry and blasphemy, and prescribe a penalty of death for idolatry and blasphemy. So I'm not at all for a moment recommending that Israelis adopt the Noahide laws, because they'll, all these Christians would have to be beheaded. So I'm saying they should use Sharia, which supports the First Amendment with chapter 2, verse 256. I don't know if I'm speaking gibberish. Am I speaking gibberish? I've said it so many times. You know talk when you talk so much, you're not sure if you've gone through all your points or whatever because you've done it so many times. You get a bit confused. But basically, I'm saying that the conflict in the Middle East can be ended if Jews, Christians, and Muslims were able to have an honest and reasonable discussion on theology, because all these people getting killed, it's not, people only go on about the Palestinian Muslims, so there are Christian Palestinians too, but nobody thinks about them because for some reason they're just not considered, that maybe there are not that many of them. But the point is that if they would all get round the table and discuss how God would view what's going on, they would perhaps be able to acknowledge that their suffering is caused by disobedience to God's laws, and therefore their suffering could be ended by obedience to God's laws. But what I think would be unwelcome to the American Republic is, let's imagine the Israelis see the light and they say, all right, we're going to live under Sharia or secular Quranism with Israeli characteristics, which is a kind of Sharia based on the Quran. And we, Israeli lawyers and judges, we're going to be interpreting and applying the principles of secular Quranism, blah, blah, blah. They could do that. And that, I think, would be acceptable to the Ummah. And that would also mean that there's just no need to have this sort of two-state, three-state solution, which is a complete nonsense. You cannot have a country if you don't have a working class. I mean, it doesn't make sense, does it, to have your working classes living in a different country to you? Does it? It's because it's under a different system, right? So the Muslims in Gaza and the West Bank, they're separate to the Jews and the Knesset. It's a different political system. But I think it's crazy. I mean, imagine living in the UK or America, and it's like, oh, the working classes, they live in a different place to the people who need to work for them, and they have a different system. I think it is the contradictions and the artificiality of the situation that's making the whole thing collapse. Because if you're going to be one society, if you're going to be considered a society, you would have to have, your middle class and your working class and your government all obeying the same laws. Howard, are you asking me to move to the US? I wonder which state I would move to if this ever really happened. But here we are. We are talking about how to solve the conflict in the Middle East. And it is essentially a war of the Abrahamic religions. And really, it is between Christian Zionism and, well, you could even say it's Muslim Zionism, because the Muslims can say Jews are welcome, they'd be welcome to live in Israel, but they have to live under Sharia. And that's basically Muslim Zionism, because when you say that Jews can live in the territory known as Israel, you are saying that they do have a homeland. So the only issue that is in dispute is how they shall live in Israel. Obviously, liberal democracy is increasingly being challenged and doubted in the West. So it wouldn't be fair to keep imposing liberal democracy on Israelis. I mean, they've had to have, how many elections have they had in as many as 5 years? I think they've had 6 or something ridiculous like that. I think being told to vote and vote and vote again would make you doubt the system that is making you vote and vote and vote and vote again. So, if more people were prepared to discuss my proposal, the sooner the conflict in the Middle East would come to an end, or at any rate be better understood as a war of the Abrahamic religions. And they're not declaring it properly because nobody these days takes religion seriously enough to discuss theology. So all we're talking about, all the secular Jews and Christians and Muslims are talking about is money and power, which is not really the idea if you care about righteousness and divine approval. Oh, Howard, how sweet of you to want me to move to your town. I don't know which town or state you're in. Right, I think I've said all I wanted to say. I hope that was reasonably clear. Apologies if it isn't, but I'm saying just get these Jews, Christians, and Muslims to sort out the problem theologically and ask how Israel should be governed, under what principles, under what religion, and you will have the whole thing sorted, because whatever they choose in Israel will come to the West, because in a way the Israel is a microcosm of the West. It's not for It is not for nothing that Israel, to this day, calls itself a liberal democracy. So thank you for your attention. I hope I have been understood. Thank you for your attention.